Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Solar Energy UK public webinar. This is a webinar that's going to go out on our website post the event as well. So this is for our members, but also customers of solar. And we're today going to be focusing on the commercial benefits of on-site solar, particularly rooftop, but also some projects are private wire and sort of ground mount nearby the site as well. As many of you will know, there's a high demand and a lot of interest, and we've recently published a corporate buyer's guide, which is there to sort of guide those sort of companies who are thinking about solar, if you like, sort of what steps they need to take. And as part of that guide, there's also a directory of Solar Energy UK members who they can work with. So in terms of the agenda, let's move on to the next slide. Sorry, I should introduce myself. My name is Chris Hewitt. I'm the Chief Executive of Solar Energy UK. Now we can go on to the agenda. So we've got a number of different segments to this event. Firstly, we'll have actually a recorded presentation from our policy manager on the rooftop side, Kevin McCann. He's on leave this week, but he's recorded a presentation which summarises some of what's in that corporate buyer's guide. Then we've got a little panel discussion amongst from some buyers and some representatives of the customers, if you like. So Claire Bottle, the Chief Executive of the UK Warehousing Association, Patrick Bailey, Major Transactions Manager of Network Rail, and Pat Durai, the Head of Procurement, Group Head of Procurement for Sky. So they'll sort of give their sort of reactions and their sort of customer's eye sort of perspective, if you like. And then finally, we'll have some more specific sort of ideas around some of the project financing options which are available to these projects from Atrato Group, who are one of our members. So without further ado, let's move on to the presentation. So Kevin will be magicked up onto the screen. So this is a recording, but
good morning, everybody. And thank you for being with us. My name is Kevin McCann, and I am the Policy Manager at Solar Energy UK. Really looking forward to talking you through the benefits of commercial solar systems this morning and our corporate buyer's guide. So just before we go any further, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Conrad Energy, Segen and SolarEdge. Thank you very much indeed for your support to this piece of work. So we are here to talk about our corporate buyer's guide. This is a new document which we published recently, looking at the benefits of and explaining the benefits of on-site solar power systems for commercial buyers, so businesses and companies up and down the country. And what it does is provides an accessible introduction to renewable energy and solar power, explains what a solar power system is, explains how it works, explains the key commercial considerations, really from an investment perspective, that potential solar operators need to think about, and also contains a directory of Solar Energy UK members who will be able to help guide businesses, companies, and other organisations interested in solar through the process of installing a system. So as I've said, it explains how solar can help businesses and other organisations, schools and public sector bodies, for example, to reduce their energy bills and reduce their carbon emissions. So helping them navigate the energy price crisis that we're all aware of that's taking place at the moment, and also improve their sustainability as organisations as we look to achieve the UK's legally binding net zero economy target of 2050. So we're promoting this publication very widely to organisations up and down the country. For example, we are communicating with companies listed on the FTSE 350 stock exchange, and others who we know are interested in those benefits that I've mentioned of reducing their bills and their carbon emissions. And it doesn't sit in isolation, this document. It sits alongside the other work that we've published, explaining how to maintain a solar system, to look after it, and to ensure that it's kept in the best shape possible to maximise those benefits. So a little bit of a market update, looking at the deployment of solar over the last couple of years. What this graph shows is the volume of solar capacity deployed each quarter since April 2019. The reason why that date matters is because that's the date at which all new commercial solar systems in the UK became fully subsidy free. And as you can see, the graph tells a very clear story, which is that there's been a steady increase and stable growth in the commercial solar market since roughly 3 years ago. You can see quite clearly the impact of the first COVID lockdown there in Q2 2020, so April, May, June 2020. All of that growth that was not deployed during that quarter was then incorporated into the following months. And basically ever since, again with a slight dip in the beginning of last year for the third lockdown, there's been very stable growth. So around 50 megawatts deployed per quarter, which is a pretty significant quantity of solar in terms of generation capacity in 2021. So continuing the theme really, SolarEdge UK members have reported extremely strong demand so far this year. Their order books are overflowing, and I think it's fair to say that the whole industry is looking forward to what should be a period of very strong growth. There's hundreds of large-scale commercial rooftop projects in the planning pipeline, and assuming that we see around 80 megawatts a quarter of deployment this year, then the total amount of solar deployed could be upwards of 300 megawatts. And that's represented by the blue columns in that graph. This isn't guaranteed to take place, of course. Of course, there are the reasons why it may not, but I think, as I said, everyone is looking forward to what should be a very strong period for the industry. We published a growth forecast out to 2030 last year called Lighting the Way, and our net zero compliance scenario in that document suggested that we could see around 5 gigawatts of commercial solar by 2030. And based on what we've been hearing this year, we think that's an entirely feasible target. For context, the new nuclear power plant at Hinkley Point has a capacity of about 3.2 gigawatts. So we are really talking about a very significant addition to the UK's renewable generation capacity should we see this quantity of commercial rooftop solar deployed. So why is solar so popular? What's driving demand? As I mentioned, there is an energy price crisis, which I'm sure many of us are aware of, both in terms of our residential domestic bills, but also energy is an important cost center for businesses as well, typically being the second largest expenditure after payroll. Solar systems are a mature, improving technology, and that means they're a great way to reduce costs, because if you're producing a proportion of your own electricity, you don't need to buy it from the national grid, and also to reduce your carbon emissions because of the benefits of solar in that regard. The good news is that the technology is continuing to improve, and there's lots of new developments coming down the line, which means that yield, so the amount of power that you're generating, keeps increasing. That includes more powerful solar modules, solar panels themselves. New things like bifacials, so that's a double-sided panel, and also tracking systems. So some businesses have ground-mounted arrays on land adjacent to their premises, and tracking systems allow solar systems to follow the sun from east to west during the day. New glass that lets more light through, which again increases the amount of power that can be generated. And new sort of project siting opportunities. So, for example, we're now starting to see some developers looking at floating solar. So that means, as the name implies, setting up solar arrays that float on bodies of water. So, for example, reservoirs. There's also a lot of flexibility in how solar can be financed, so self-funded, so using a company's balance sheet or other assets to fund a solar system itself. Using asset finance, so for example, a lease agreement. Also things like a power purchase agreement, whereby an external investor, so a third party, is able to provide the financing. The system operator receives the benefit of reduced energy bills, and they pay back the investor using some of the savings that they make from those bills. And then the policy environment is improving, and there's been a lot of developments this year. And that's very positive for the development of new commercial solar systems. So a little bit more both from the cost side of it and then on the policy side of it, as I mentioned. In terms of solar costs, these have come down by around 60 to almost 90%, depending on the type of project in roughly the last decade. So the graph on the right, the yellow line, represents the cost of grid scale solar, which has come down very steeply, very sharply, as you can see. The cost of rooftop solar as well has come down by around 60%. And that's one of the reasons why solar is now some of the most affordable energy around. To give you an indication of what it might cost to actually install a project, as of spring last year, approximately £615 per kilowatt. So what that means is if you are intending to install a 100 kilowatt system, it might cost you around £61,000. We should be clear that our assumption is that these costs might have gone up slightly. There's a lot of complexities in the global and British economy at the moment, and we are currently surveying SolarEdge UK members on their 2022 installation costs. Nonetheless, because of the fact that the energy price crisis is so severe, the relative savings of an on-site solar system may still actually have gone up. And so that's one of the things that we're going to be looking at in our commercial analysis that we are carrying out this spring and summer. Should also know that there's a very healthy demand for solar around the world. And that matters because the supply chain is by and large global and integrated. And there are new manufacturing chains being set up in the EU, in the US, in India in particular. And there are also companies in the UK considering how they might be able to set up manufacturing facilities here as well. And looking at the costs in more detail is something that I mentioned we're doing this spring in terms of what it costs to install a system. We're also going to be running a project, or our intention is to run a project, looking at what this means in the long run for property owners and investors, so both tenants and also landlords as well, and others investing in new non-domestic property, and also in retrofitting existing buildings with a solar system. So I mentioned that the solar policy environment is improving. The big thing to mention here, if you're not aware, is that the British government earlier in the year published a new energy security strategy. And the solar industry was very pleased to see that the government has in effect committed to a deployment target. The government has said that it expects to see a 5-fold increase in solar by 2035. There's approximately 15 gigawatts of solar at the moment. So what that means is the government is effectively expecting to see around 70 gigawatts of solar by 2035. And that will be split across the residential rooftop sector, the commercial scale sector, which we're talking about today, and also the utility scale sector, so larger ground-mounted projects. As part of that strategy, the government said that it also intends to simplify the planning process for new rooftop projects, solar rooftop projects, and also think about how best the public sector can make use of the portfolio of buildings and estates that it has available for potential solar deployment. And as part of that, they've also said that they're going to design new performance standards for new both domestic and non-domestic buildings in such a way that PV will effectively be installed as standard. So these developments build on previous changes in the policy environment. So solar was exempted from business rates by the Chancellor in the budget last year. This was very welcome because previously there were some sort of discrepancies that meant it was a few complications relating to the rates regime, and they've now been removed, which is very good news. The government also announced a couple of weeks ago that it's consulting on extending capital allowances. So these are effectively investment credits for businesses who wish to invest in on-site solar. These capital allowances currently exist and are due to run until the end of this financial year, so until March 2023. And as I said, the government is consulting on extending these. And also there has been some grant funding available to cover capital costs for the public sector. So for public sector organisations wishing to install solar, and that's been organised under the Public Sector Decarbonisation Scheme. So that's all the good news. Solar's doing very well. There are good reasons for this, and there is lots of supportive developments that have helped to enable this. There are some challenges, of course. One of them is the grid, the national grid. So that's the transmission and distribution network, so the cables and pylons and wires that are used to transport electricity around the country. There's a lot of new renewable and other generation capacity coming onto the grid, and that will need to be upgraded in order to allow us to move all this renewable electricity around the country. And there's a lot of money and infrastructure that needs to be used to do that. And it's one of the sort of longer term challenges for the UK. Planning, I mentioned that there are various issues involved in planning, and we welcomed, as I mentioned previously, the announcement by the government that it's looking at how it can simplify planning. I think that would be very welcome. There's also a bit of a skill shortage in the industry, I think it's fair to say. Many of our members are recruiting. That's because there is this very strong demand for solar. But as with other sectors of the economy, there is a very strong demand for people to come and work in the industry. And everyone is looking for more talented people to join the industry. And we're working through options for how we can raise awareness of the very wide number of roles in the industry, to support our members to take on these people to help deliver that 70 gigawatt target for solar that I mentioned the government has announced in the last few weeks. And then supply chains, there's a lot of disruption in the global economy as the world starts to emerge from COVID. So things to do with logistics, with the availability of raw materials. There's a chip shortage that people may have heard of. This is a particular issue, for example, for the car industry. And of course, this sort of disruption feeds into other industries as well. The solar industry isn't immune from it. And so there's a lot of work going on to address the sort of logistics and so on of how you get materials and components and solar panels fundamentally into the UK, around the country, and then onto solar roofs. So I think in summary, it's fair to say that on-site solar is doing very well. That's very clear from the deployment figures. So that's the graphs that I showed to you at the beginning of this morning's talk. There are very good reasons for that. It's a clear way for companies, organizations, and others to meet their financial and sustainability targets. Our corporate buyer's guide provides a step-by-step explanation of the process. So how to go about thinking through, okay, I'd like to consider an on-site solar system. What are the questions I need to answer? What's the information I need to be able to take a sensible decision? And who are the people who can help me do this? And the answer to that last question is SolarEdge UK members. So there is a directory at the end of the guide. And our very firm recommendation is that if you're considering an on-site solar project, it is to contact a SolarEdge UK member company who will be able to guide you through the process from start to finish. And in the meantime, as a trade body, we will continue to help grow the industry, address some of those challenges that I mentioned a moment ago, and support more companies and organizations to benefit from the reduced costs and reduced carbon emissions of installing an on-site solar power system. So thank you very much indeed. Please do give the guide a read and feel very free to get in contact with us with any questions you may have. And we will look forward to continuing the discussion. Thank you very much indeed, and good morning to you.
Okay, that's excellent. So now you've got a sense of the industry perspective. Now I want to bring up our panelists. So we have Patrick Bailey from Network Rail. We have Pat Jure from Sky, and we have Claire Bottle from the UK Warehousing Association. If you all want to switch your cameras on, and we'll check your sound and make sure that's all working. So I know we've had some issues there earlier.
Okay, can you hear me, Chris?
I can hear you.
Fabulous.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm hearing you loud and clear. Thank you.
It's slightly nervous. I've got various things telling me on my screen to update my settings, but it's fine. But we are lost. Yeah, we're missing our last two panelists. Perhaps whilst we're waiting for Claire and Pat to come online, perhaps do you want to introduce yourself and say a little bit about Network Rail's interest in this space?
Sure. Yeah, happy to do that. Thank you. Well, really delighted to be here this morning. So Patrick Bailey, as I think my mugshot shows there. I mean, I work in the corporate finance and business development team within NR, and we're sort of a group that does non-routine projects. I guess like the classic corporate development team in the private sector. So we do a lot of partnering with the private sector as it looks at investing in the railroads and helping us to deliver a better service. So that's so much about me. I think it's always difficult to introduce Network Rail because everyone knows us, but sometimes people don't know what we actually do, or it gets confused with other parts of the rail sector. So in essence, we are the infrastructure owners and operators of the rail network. And in that sense, we operate 20,000 miles of tracks, circa 2,500 plus stations of various sizes, from Waterloo to probably a small station in a tiny village or a town, and numerous bridges and viaducts, and over 100 maintenance depots. And I call out those figures because, in a sense, it's that two things: is that real estate that we have, plus our electricity consumption, that sort of underpins or will shape our net zero strategy. And in terms of electricity consumption, we are probably one of the largest consumers of power in the country. We consume circa 4.5 terawatt hours, of roughly 10% of that is for non-traction, i.e. runs in our offices, our stations, our depots, etc. And by and large, that's a bit where we want to focus on initially to decarbonize. And I think that's, in essence, well, I could rattle on for longer about Network Rail, but I think that probably puts it in context as it relates to what we are talking about here today. I think you're on mute, Chris, I'm afraid.
Yeah, sorry. Haven't done that for ages. Pat, do you want us to check that your sound is working? Because I know we were having problems earlier.
Hello, testing.
Yay, we can hear you. That's great. So do you want to introduce yourself and say what you're interested in solar is?
Hi, everyone. So Pat Durai, and I'm Group Head of Procurement at Sky, and my category areas are, well, mostly real estate, facilities and utilities. So, of course, the energy crisis is my problem, apparently, at Sky. So so that is kind of my interest in this. Sky have, I think, probably two hats here. We have a very public commitment to going net zero by 2030, which is our Sky Zero piece. We were the media partners for COP26, so there's been a lot of focus in our business on going truly net zero, and a lot of focus on how we measure our science-based targets, how we try and decarbonize across our estate. So there's a lot of energy and will and interest across our business for doing that. So my interest is generally, well, it's procurement, right? So we're looking at the bottom line. And as I always say, never waste a good energy crisis, right? There's now suddenly a lot of finance bods looking at our long-range plans and the risks to our budgets of our electricity costs. We were very, I'm going to say, lucky, and also we thought about this and thought it was just too much hassle. We hedged, we had a very long-term hedging arrangement with our utility partners in 2020, and that has yet to run out. So we were very lucky to not be as exposed to the vagaries of the market in the last sort of 6 to 9 months. But I think everyone is very aware that as we're coming out of this, that the market is very different from where we were. So we need to come up with a plan to make sure that we can, I guess, ride out that change with as little risk to our bottom line as possible. So that is kind of our interest. Very interested to hear what, from the other panelists and from and everyone's questions. It is a really good time to be doing these sorts of projects. There's a lot of interest and a lot of focus from definitely senior people. So.
And just as well, do you have live projects at the moment? Are you sort of currently installing solar?
Yeah. Yes, and looking at other things, and lots of energy and lots of interest, because we need to be ready for when we are no longer in a electricity.
Yeah.
Age.
Okay. So I might come back to you and ask about lessons learned on that in a sec. But let's introduce Claire first.
Hi. Hello. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Great. I'm not sure if the sound was perfect on Pat's introduction. I noticed in the chat some people couldn't hear, and I couldn't hear it either, but hopefully some could. Hello, everybody. My name's Claire Bottle. I'm the Chief Executive of the UK Warehousing Association, and we're a trade association, so we've got that in common with SolarEdge UK. But in our case, we're a trade body representing warehousing, so we've got about 900 member companies. The majority of those are companies that operate warehouses here in the UK. And the proportion of warehouses that have solar PV at the moment is quite low. So we're undertaking some research, and we've been really pleased to have support from SolarEdge UK and some of your member companies with the research that we're doing. It's not ready yet, but we're definitely taking an increasing interest in this area.
Great. So yeah, I see there are hopefully everyone can hear now. If there's issues about settings, that perhaps one of our team can put that on the chat. But if you have questions as well so we've got about 80 people on the call. If anyone's got questions, if you pop them in the questions tab, then I'll be able to sort of field those and take them for the panel. But Claire, perhaps we can start with you. Perhaps you can say a little bit more about what the questions that your research is looking at, and what you want to try and find from this piece of research.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. So really, we're looking at 3 different outputs. The first is that we just want a sort of generic business case, like, is it a good idea to put solar panels on warehouse roofs? And I would hazard a guess that the answer is yes. But
I'm going to say yes to that. Yeah.
I suppose what we're looking for is a bit more sort of depth and some facts and figures to back that up. The second piece of work that we're doing is a kind of toolkit for our members. And of course, the corporate buyer's guide that we were just talking about is a really, really useful document. And that's actually what we're recommending to our members at the moment. But of course, that's aimed at a wide range of different sorts of corporate buyers. And our toolkit will probably be a bit more focused specifically on warehousing companies. And then our third piece of work, and probably the one I've got the least expectations for, it's going to be a bit of a surprise, is a policy document, which we would like to use to engage with local and national government to see what extra things could be done to help unlock some of the opportunity.
Okay, that's good to know. I think we'd be interested in seeing what policy barriers you perceive from your sector, and really glad to hear that you're using our corporate buyer's guide to adapt, if you like, for your sector. That's really, really helpful. Let's go back to Pat now. Perhaps so you're kind of a little bit further down the line, I guess, than some of Claire's members or Patrick. What's your advice to both to the other panelists in terms of lessons learned that you've received, but also to our industry, sort of what you'd like to sort of see from our side to make it easier for as a procurer?
Yeah. Oh gosh, what would I say? Move on to pick, please. No, because I'm joking. I think what we've definitely learned as we've gone through this process is that not all there's lots of different ways you can do this. There's lots of different commercial models you can use. Not all of them work for everybody. So I think understanding your business needs is really important. So if you're not if you don't have a lot of cash washing around, a lot of us do, but if businesses would prefer to go down the CapEx route, that can sometimes be easier than going down the PPA route. PPA contracts can be fiendishly complicated, just in the nature of the way that they're drafted. I think if I could say anything to all providers of PPAs, is there a way we can make them a little bit easier, a little bit simpler, a little bit cleaner, so they don't take months and months for us to have to negotiate, and they're quite quick and straightforward, and we can just get going, get cracking, and get them on site. I think the thing about, and actually really interesting, Claire, on warehousing, that is the next target on my list of places to look at, is where we as Sky are using warehouse space and want to maximize that and that's going to help Sky's scope 3. So if you think about a company's scope of emissions, when a supplier or a customer and using our products generates carbon, that creates that scope 3 emission. So we are looking at all of those things next. So once we get our own sort of house in order, we are then going to start looking at and helping our partners, or looking at, say, warehouse groups or different sort of suppliers to try and do that. So whatever you can do to help facilitate those conversations would be great. And we want to have those conversations across different industries. So whether that's through joint suppliers, whether that's looking at large, any other sort of consortium kind of arrangements that we can do. Those are they're going to be the way that we can maybe work together, where one company can't just push forward when there's other companies in the mix, and that sort of multi-tenanted question will start to come into play as well. What else would I say? I think it would help. I'm really lucky. I think Sky, everyone is very focused on this. It's definitely, there's a lot of buy-in across our business. I would say people get very confused when you start to bring up things about commodity costs and non-commodity costs and why energy prices are going up. People just sort of look at you sort of blankly and panic. Solar is a very simple technology. It is getting simpler, it's getting better. It's a very easy one to get people buy into. But I would say that sometimes some businesses aren't necessarily on that same cycle. We're a lot further ahead than others just because we've made this public commitment and we're bearing down on that and trying to do what we can. And we did that with our single-use plastic piece with the Sky Ocean Rescue as well, and we've absolutely smashed that target. So it's trying to get that your business to buy into something which they may not, but then again, the money may be the way in for a lot of businesses now is how much energy prices have gone up. But that doesn't necessarily mean you want to also knee-jerk, just stick solar panels on everything, because that also may not be the right thing to do. So it's maybe thinking, having a bit of a strategy, using every lever that you can, and then if the industry could come up with a way of making a PPA a little bit easier, I would be very grateful.
I think that's helpful. I think we can put what we sometimes hear from our members as well is perhaps the procurers sometimes also have their own ways of doing things, and so I think there is often been discussion around can we standardize those sort of PPAs and sort of make those agreements. And I think as the sector grows, as the demand grows, it's going to be easier to do that, I think, hopefully. So that's and we've got some other speakers talking about the financing side in a sec, so I'll hold on that. There's a question for you, Claire, but I'm going to go to Patrick first and then come back to you if that's okay. So Patrick, again, perhaps if you can expand a little bit about the interest that Network Rail has in terms of solar, what you see the potential is, and what's your pathway, if you like. And again, as a perspective of you're a large player with lots of sites. So how should our industry engage with you?
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, I suppose also to put it in context, I did mention that roughly 10%, probably, maybe let's dial back a bit. So like Sky, well, we're government funded majority, north of 75%. So we are committed to net zero. And indeed, we are committed to, from our electricity consumption standpoint, to be net zero by 2030. Fortunately, most of our electricity consumption, 90%, it's nuclear. And in that sense, there's no carbon there. I know that can be a controversial statement, but we'll park that for the time being. But it's a 10% we're going after where we consume the grid mix. And that's where the carbon lies. And you all know the grid mix could be easily up to 40% of it being carbon. In the past, we have sort of gone out to the market and just bought regos. And we thought that's not the way to go. So like currently right now, I'm leading a project, knock wood, days away, weeks away from signing, where we're doing our first corporate PPA. This is we went out to the market for up to 90 megawatt 90 gigawatt hours per year. It will be a corporate PPA, it will be a new facility, it will be offsite. So I mentioned this because our numbers are so huge that, quite frankly, our on-site solar will just be a small fraction of what we consume. But it still is a significant commitment. And quite frankly, there's some savings there. And as I confessed at the start, I'm a corporate financier. So I may be the money people that Pat mentioned who have suddenly shown up with an interest. But
you're very welcome.
But so in that sense, to put it in context, so we looked at the 450 and we thought, we think we can probably do around 400, give or take, via corporate PPAs. And it'll be a series. The first one, we're weeks away from signing, we'll build. But we think if we challenge ourselves, give the side of our estate, we probably can do, if we're lucky, maybe 50 by on-site. And that 50, what we face is that, I mean, we expect, okay, the non-traction, and a classic case that Blackfriars Station, when we redevelop that station, you rarely have a seat unless you do a flyover or go on the internet, but the entire roof is by and large covered in solar panels. And that's, I think, is a 1 megawatt peak thing. It supplies half the power goes to the station and we spill to the grid, whenever we, on the summer months, whenever we can't consume it all. And so that's the sort of thinking we're thinking around other areas of our estate. What we face, though, is that we will take a portfolio approach. I mean, just doing one site or two sites, doesn't matter how large it is, just quite frankly, is not the best use of our resources. So what we are thinking of is really we may create a portfolio, find a partner or partners, and literally say, this is a portfolio. The challenge we have to do now, adding further complication to the PPA, is how do you price a PPA when you're yet to be far enough in the development cycle to know what the capex really is. And that's the thing we're working with right now, as to how do we create a commercial model with that flexibility that a partner will ultimately make money, otherwise why they want to do it, and the projects get delivered. But fundamentally, our approach is that that's the only logical way, I think, and we create portfolios and then find a partner. And we have decided we're going the PPA route. Because as you all know, government has no money. I mean, or they're better use of government money. Let's put it that way. We all would prefer them to fund the NHS or build schools than building solar power plant where the private sector can do it better and more efficiently.
In terms of that portfolio, is it something which is it kind of regional? Where you sort of look at bits of the country and say we'll do there, or is it just across sort of a whole range of stations?
We're still having that debate. We're big enough that I'm almost thinking, I mean, and it hasn't been decided, that maybe regional, again, aligned to how we regionalize a business and bringing ownership and accountability closer to where our decision making, close to where the action is, maybe the better way to go. But we haven't decided that. Maybe
Right.
I think it's big enough that even on a regional basis, there will be a large enough portfolio to attract people who will be interested in looking at it.
Have you got a sense of what the scale of those portfolios will be? So how many
probably,
sites, how many megawatts, or too early?
Well, I'm thinking that it's a multi-site approach. So you're thinking of more than a dozen sites, and I would expect the median site of around 200 or more, depending. I mean, it varies, but anywhere from just shy of a megawatt to around at least 200, 250 kilowatts. So if you think of, well, I mean, say a warehouse. I mean, our maintenance depots are significantly larger than a warehouse. They're built to house, I don't know, 5 or 6 trains, 8 carriage lengths. The challenge we face though is that, as you can appreciate, if you're going to put the solar panel there and they're going to be there for, I don't know, 25 years plus, we have to time the development cycle of the asset that they're going on. So going on a station, then you cannot touch that roof again for another 20 years.
Yeah. So it's that integration piece into the rest of the business.
Indeed.
Yeah.
But we think there's enough sites that what we're doing is deciding on the strategy, putting together a portfolio, and thinking through what is the best commercial model in terms of how we gain share, given that portfolio will be at the very, very early stage. Almost impossible to accurately price a PPA at that stage.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Okay, so Claire, there's a question specifically for you: is what you feel the biggest challenge or boundary to get solar on warehouse roofs?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and hopefully our research will be able to answer it with a bit more authority than I can now. I think potentially, though, there are probably 2 challenges. One of them touches on something Patrick was just talking about, which is about the sort of complexity of the stakeholders involved. So a lot of warehouse buildings are leased, and you might have an arm's length investor who is legally the owner of the building, but doesn't have much operational interest in it. And then there will often be a third-party warehouse operating company that's the tenant, but the goods inside the warehouse might belong to a different party again. And really, all of them need to align on the theory or the ideology before decisions can be made about installing solar PV and who's liable for dilapidations and that sort of thing. So that's one challenge. And then the second challenge, which I think applies for all kinds of renewables, is about the district network operators and their ability to deal with buildings that were built as consumers of power turning into power plant, which is not what networks were ever designed for, and can be technically problematic.
That picks up with the question from Simon Russell there, actually around grid capacity. That is something which we're seeing across the whole industry. But I don't know, Pat, have you encountered any of the sort of the grid issues that I mentioned here?
Not so much the grid issues, but definitely two of the issues. So as Patrick mentioned, the issue about on-site solar, because I think that's what we're focusing on for us is we're focusing, get our on-site done and then look at what's left and go off-site. But we know that the vast majority of our needs are going to have to be done with the large off-site PPAs and then NA and other solutions. We're in the same boat with buildings where we really don't want to put solar panels on a building that's going to be demolished in 10 years. We really just want to have it there, set it and forget it and leave it. So that is one challenge that we're facing. So completely sympathetic, Patrick. I did want to ask why you're not sleeving back your excess power. So that might be a conversation for later, because I wouldn't why you're spilling to the grid and not coming back, or doing some kind of flex arrangement with your provider, but we can talk about that later, because that's something we're looking at. And Claire, that's absolutely also the problem we're having with some of the sites that we don't own and that we lease, and we have long-term leases on, and there's 4 or 5 different parties, and having to get subleases granted and all sorts of fun complexity that we have. So it has been a challenge, and that our next challenge is actually looking at what we want to do about working with our warehouse providers on this. So there is a lot of energy around it. One thing that is interesting, and someone mentioned to me, was that there is going to be some changes to building regs coming in 2035 or 2030, and those building regs could also be a driver for landlords. And I don't know the detail again because I've had the meeting with our real estate partner on this, but there is some kind of push that is coming in the distant future. Yes, more than 10 years from now, but it is there, and some landlords are taking action sooner as they make those sort of changes so that it helps them today. But I'm not sure it's going to have to slowly start to happen, but a lot of that will come from the pincer movement of private sector business, consumer demand and government regulation. The pincer movement will come, and then it will all start to really get.
Yeah, we're seeing that on the new build residential side. So that there are building reg changes coming in this year, but they'll sort of effectively come into force sort of mid next year, which will effectively mean all English homes will require some solar on, I think. So it's I think there are equivalent changes on the commercial side as well, but maybe in a slightly longer timescale. But from our perspective, it feels like the commercials are probably going to get there ahead of the building regs in this sense. But if there's, as you say, if there's those two things going on. Now, I'm conscious of time, and we have another couple of speakers to come. But if there are any other points which panelists want to make before we wrap up this discussion and move on to the stuff on financing.
I might come in, if that's okay, just to say a little bit about the demand for electricity in warehousing, which may overlap a bit with some of the things that Pat and Patrick are talking about as well. So what we anticipate is that logistics is going to become more and more reliant on electric vehicles. We're already seeing that in the van market, and obviously, with rail freight, which comes under Network Rail, and there are now larger commercial vehicles which are electrically operated. So I think for the warehousing sector, it's not just about the electricity we might consume in the building, but it's also about how we help to be part of the solution for the infrastructure that aids that change.
Definitely. And do you have, do a lot of your sites or your member sites have a lot of sort of parking space and sort of effectively grain maintenance sites where you could put carports and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so a lot of our member companies will be warehouse operators who also have some kind of road-going fleet. And for those that don't, they would still have lorries and vans coming and going as part of the supply chain activity. So whether they're whether the fleet is owned or whether it's a visiting fleet, there would have to be some different commercial arrangements, and I'm not sure what that would look like. But either way, I think there's an opportunity.
Definitely, yeah. Any other points? Yes, as there's a question there from Charlie Armitage around whether solar is going to have an impact on the asset and market value of the property itself. If there's any evidence that
I would say possibly yes. I think when we're building buildings, we are building them to be solar ready, so there is a lot of focus on that. I think on what Claire said, that is the next big challenge, is once we get to a point of working out our own energy usage, all of the electrification of fleet and cars and vehicles, and the more electric cars that come to site, we are absolutely in the same boat trying to work out how we manage that increase. I think also technology itself is a huge driver of electricity need, and even though individual devices themselves are getting more and more efficient, as we're getting more and more hungry for bandwidth, more and more hungry for content, that is driving a huge carbon footprint too. So we have to be really mindful of how we support the business in that growth as well, because, you know, it's all well and good to try and cut that, but we need to support that increase, definite increase in demand. And Claire is like literally reading my mind, because people are asking me about what are we going to do about we're going to plug in our new electric vans, and I'm like, at the warehouse, and they go, where? I'm like, well. So this is definitely something that I think yeah, it's great that there's a consortiums looking at this, and I think that is how we're probably going to solve some of these sorts of larger problems and infrastructure problems, is with people getting together in business groups and trying to solve them, rather than just individual companies trying to solve them.
Agreed. Yeah. Hopefully this panel has done a little bit to help facilitate that. We'll continue to do more. Absolutely. So I'm gonna hold this panel there, because we have a couple of the speakers. So thank you to Claire and to Pat and to Patrick. Really helpful contributions. And we'll continue to work together in the future, no doubt. Perhaps if we can bring up our last two speakers, who will go into a little bit more detail around some of the financing options. We've got Gurpreet Gujuri from Atrato Group and Gustav Schuler. Now, are you both there? I'm hoping that you are. If you're not, then I'll bring our panel back. Here we go.
Hello.
Hi, Gustav.
Hi. Yeah, that worked. Hi, Chris. I think Gurpreet will not join, but I'll do his part
Okay.
as well.
Floor's
So
yours. The floor
fine.
is yours.
Awesome. So yeah, thanks for the opportunity to speak here. Really interesting panel discussion, and I'm hoping I can pick up on some points that you made throughout your conversation. So I'll be talking a little bit about financing models for commercial and industrial solar. I'm technical director at Roof at Atrato. We are advisors to a fund. I mean, am I working on the slides, or does that? There. Thank you. I just go quickly over who we are. We are an investment advisor to a listed fund, which is Atrato Onsite Energy. That fund has been launched in 2021 in November. We collected 150 million pound, which we now are able to invest in mainly on-site solar systems for corporate industrial off-takers. We have some mandate as well to invest in off-site systems, and we are basically there to on the long term. I mean, we will hold those assets for the duration of the lifetime or of the PPA term, and yeah, don't sell them. And the next slide, please. Just quickly, the team here. I'm technical director at the fund. I'm working alongside Gurpreet and Francisca and John Ashford, and below is the Atrato leadership team. I think we can quickly run through it. I think there's enough on the financing models to be set. This is our board: Juliet Davenport, founder of Good Energy, Marlene and Faye with her, and they are the board of Atrato Onsite Energy. Okay, next one, and there we go. The different funding models that I'm going to talk about is the PPA route, the power purchase agreement, the self-funding route, and asset financing route. And here, just to pick up on what Pat said, that the PPAs can be lengthy and complicated to negotiate. I mean, I agree that is often the case. However, we are working on well, we have the PPAs and the lease. I think one trick there is that both documents tie in together and come from one feather. And if you compare it to the self-funding or asset finance route, there you will have to enter into other contracts, EPC contract, O&M contract. Possibly you need to work with technical advisors, which you have at PPA projects possibly as well. So there are grid applications, planning applications, a lot of administrative work and contractual work, which our aim is with PPAs would be captured, and everything comes from one hand basically, and ideally customers would not have to have too much of an involvement in all of this. And similarly for the asset finance, you would have to do a bank application or apply for the mortgage. Technical advisors involvement usually is required to advise the lender, and then go manage basically EPC, O&M agreements, etc. The same way. And the next slide, please. So these funding options, just some pros and cons in short. On the PPA model, of course, no upfront costs are required. With an asterisk, to be honest. I mean, there are of course legal costs which have been mentioned to enter into or negotiate PPAs and leases. There are ways how we can bake that into the PPA, so that there is really zero upfront costs when they come. There is no development risk. I think that's a key. No development risk for the customers. No responsibility for O&M. We are typically able to provide performance guarantees. That means there is a certain energy that we would guarantee to come in to the customers. And the PPA model in general, I think, focuses or allows the customers to focus on their core business, and I think that's one key advantage that we have. That the PPA model allows is, it leaves room and does not draw resources for I don't know, manufacturers of cars or parts to deal with solar. And the PPA model has a business rates relief, which, as we heard earlier, it has been now extended to self-funders as well, in form of a business rates exemption. The self-funder, they have the advantage, of course, they have full ownership and control of the systems, and if the businesses have low cost of capital and have the means to invest into solar, then I think that's also a good option for those businesses. On the asset finance team, the advantages are the spread. Capital costs can be spread across a long time, and flexible financing is possible. So if you do a higher purchase, for example, or a lease arrangement, payments can be flexibly generated. On the drawbacks, maybe just quickly, on the PPA model, the customers have no direct control over the PV system because it's not in the ownership of the customer, but of the PPA provider, and it is a long-term commitment, which maybe refers to Claire's comment about the lease and the length of lease landlords that are involved, which could make it a little bit more complex at times. Self-funded, you would have to have the requirement for the upfront payment, which can be significant. Operational costs have to be considered, and they can be significant. I mean, there's a lot to consider beside costs for O&M. There are insurance costs. There are repair costs, inverter replacement, asset management potentially. So a lot of costs throughout the lifetime or the operational time of the project. You're exposed, or the customers are exposed to performance risks in terms of failure of components or outages or anything. And business rates. I mean, I'm saying business rates are applicable. However, there is the business rates exemption from now, I think, until 2035 for eligible equipment, which I understand, and that accounts for all three funding classes. There will be business rates still applicable to the equipment that is not eligible for the exemption. But would be great if the guys from SolarEdge could provide a little bit more detail on that. Asset finance drawbacks is just an increased debt on non-core investment, meaning businesses need to consider can they afford that debt, or would they need this the funds for operational for their core business. Default in payments of those debts could lead possibly to a loss of the asset. And generally, I mean, everything that applies to the self-funded solution here applies to the asset finance solution as well. On the funding process, just briefly, I mean, on the PPA, I think it can be relatively straightforward, subject to negotiating and finding agreements on the legal contracts. Is the technical assessment that the PPA provider does very, very quickly, free of any charge, using satellite images, half-hourly data, and any information that is available on the buildings. They can then draft a budget proposal, and based on that proposal, documentation can be negotiated and executed, PPA and lease agreements, and then financial close, and the project can be developed and go into construction. On the self-funded route, similarly, the technical assessment has to be done, of course, and then one would have to do the EPC sourcing, the commercial assessment of the project, internal budget approval for such a big investment would be required before it could go then into development. And on the asset finance, one would need to sort out the credit, do the technical assessment. There are always lenders' expectations usually that need to be met or followed. And then the route of the EPC sourcing, developer sourcing, would need to be sought, and development.
Gustav, we're planned to finish at 11:15. So
yeah.
You along a little bit.
Yeah. No, that's okay. I mean, the next slide is basically just a little summary of what I was just saying, the upfront cost development, I think it's important to mention that there are inherent risks in the project development, design, construction, which could lead to the project, not being able to proceed on the PPA model. That usually we find ways to take these risks. On the ownership, I think it's important to emphasize that the assets in a PPA model, we are able to hand them over to the customers after the operational period or after the term of the PPA, whereas on the self-funded and asset finance route, you would have them from the beginning on. Surplus energy would need to be fed into the grid, as Patrick mentioned already. The PPA provider typically takes the risk on varying export prices that you can get there. Self-funded and asset finance, this would be taken by the customer, this risk. And that's basically the key differences. Lots of similarities between those models, but yeah.
That's brilliant. Thank you. As I said, the webinar will be available online, so all of these slides, so you can go through the detail at your leisure later and share it with whoever you think would be interested. Good stuff. Thank you very much. I'm going to pause. I'm going to not take questions because we're a little bit over time, but really helpful. And Atrato, one of the members of SolarEdge UK. There are many others who can provide similar services and other bits of that work, all listed in our corporate buyer's guide. And any company which joins, we'll be updating this regularly. So that's something which will be a resource ongoing. Really, just finally, just to one correction, actually, one clarification I wanted to make is we had some numbers in the original presentation on costs, which Kevin gave. We're actually updating those costs, and I think he said in the presentation that the numbers we had were from about a year ago. They will have changed, and so don't take that 615 as a gospel number. It's obviously project by project difference, the size difference is a lot, but we're going to have an update to those costs in the next couple of months, hopefully. So that's a fast moving market, and so we will try to update those and watch out for that. But thank you all for attending this. I said we'll have this available online very soon, and so please share it with your colleagues and other people who might be interested. So thank you. See you again very soon, I hope.